Discover the power of music to heal and uplift. Introducing NeuroVibe, where rhythm meets recovery. NeuroVibe fuses ambient music textures with rhythmic layers to create music that goes beyond relaxation. It's crafted to resonate deeply, perfect for relaxation, self-reflection, or therapeutic sessions. NeuroVibe invites you to connect with your inner self through immersive sound. Explore NeuroVibe today on SoundCloud and experience the transformative power of music. Tune in, find your vibe, and discover what NeuroVibe can do for you. For more information, check out NeuroVibe on SoundCloud today at soundcloud.com/NeuroVibe-brainspotting. NeuroVibe is intended for general wellness and relaxation purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Explore NeuroVibe now on SoundCloud. Dive in, find your rhythm, and feel better with NeuroVibe.
Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with you. And I want to remind you, as always, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not constitute working with a licensed mental health professional. Please seek one out in your area. So, as I think you've heard with my last interview, which was with GM Logan, the GM, I was at Big Bad Con 2024. And that was both as someone there enjoying the games, but also, dipping my toe into the sort of that world, which I've been a long time player of and such. And one of the people there who I had seen across the room but did not get a chance to talk to, and thanks to our interview recently with Yvonne Che, there was another connection point. So I want to introduce you to James Mendez Hodes, or I may be mispronouncing the last name, but it's Hodes.
It turns out they're actually both correct. My grandfather pronounced it Hodes, and my father pronounced it Hodes. So I grew up pronouncing it Hodes, but technically both of those are correct.
Okay,
so you get a 200.
I'm safe there then. As you just heard him, him is an ENnie Award-winning writer, game designer, and cultural consultant. You may know his design work from Avatar: The Legends, Thousand Arrows, and Scion. His cultural consultant works for Frosthaven, Magic the Gathering, or Jack's Box Party Packs, or his work or his writing for some of the articles complaining about orcs and racism. He graduated from Swarthmore College with a major in religion and a minors in dance and English literature. He also received a master's degree in Eastern Classics from St. John College. His interests include martial arts, hip-hop, poetry, and sumo wrestling. His primary party role is tank, secondary support. So, James, welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. I know I'd listened to some of your talks both on Asian Represents and Three Black Halflings, and I know I've heard your name mentioned in a few other podcasts or reference to some of your work. So I'm just pleased to be able to have this chance to sit and talk with you. Also, I should also throw in that at this point, I think you might be my 100th episode.
That's what's up. Yep. Well, now the pressure's on. I have to be extra entertaining.
Well, it's either my 100th episode or my 99th episode. One of the two. I got to go back.
Those are both good numbers. Yeah.
Definitely. But I ask everybody, how did you get here?
All right. So mostly by accident, I would say. So, yeah, I wound up. So professionally speaking, I wound up where I am due to what I consider to be like a series of fortuitous failures. In a lot of ways, I feel like my life didn't go the way that I wanted to, the way that I hoped it had, the way that it planned. And so even going back to college, which was that was when I met Dr. Shiro, who you had previously interviewed, who ended up being both directly and indirectly responsible for so many of the good things in my life right now. I wasn't a very good student. I had grown up, and when I was in elementary school, I was a great student because I hyper focused on my work. When I was in high school, I started becoming a worse student, and that was for various reasons, many of them mental health related. And then in college, I continued to be, I became a much more confident person, especially socially, but I continued to be a pretty weak student. I had a lot of trouble focusing. So I ended up studying the things that I liked the most, that were easiest for me because I was having the most fun in class. And that was what I felt like was the only way I could scrape through. And Dr. Shiro, as a person and as a teacher, was a huge part of why I ended up studying religion in general and Black Atlantic, Afro Atlantic religion in particular, because I just loved her classes, and I felt like we had a much clearer connection than I had with a lot of other teachers. I felt like it was a rare experience, maybe too rare for a teacher to tell me exactly what she needed me to know. And then I learned it. And then she tested me on whether I knew that thing she just said. And I did, because she was real direct about it. And that ended up being the foundation of my later career. And when I put it like that, it seems like that's an experience that one should have more often, but there we are. And at the same time, I was getting really into martial arts. I had started to play capoeira, which sparked my initial interest in Afro-Atlantic religion, because the style and African religion in Brazil are so intimately connected. And playing capoeira, which I originally had an interest in, mostly from the martial arts perspective, because I'd grown up, I did wrestling in school, and I was interested in martial arts fiction. So I started playing capoeira, and then I realized, wait a second, so maybe I'm a dancer also. And that got me into studying dance also. And I picked up a minor in English lit kind of by accident. I just happened to have the credits for it. So yeah, religion major, and then dance and English lit minors. And I graduated, and I was like, damn, what the hell am I going to do with this? And I couldn't figure that out. And I bounced around between bad jobs and no jobs. And that whole time I was playing a lot of role-playing games, a lot of tabletop role-playing games, because my college roommate had got me into those. And so I was volunteering at conventions and going away at those on weekends. And that's how I met a lot of people in the game design community, mostly in the Northeastern, the indie role-playing game community, a lot of small press games, a lot of things coming out of the Forge tradition, from the old Forge message boards, and also some LARP stuff like the Nordic, especially the Nordic and American freeform live action role-playing communities. I went to grad school, and I got a master's in Eastern Classics. So that's great books of Japan, China, and India. And in grad school, I don't feel like my grad school was super hard, but I became a really good student again. I think I was the only person in my classes who did all the reading. But I went to a kind of an odd school. So St. John's College, they got two campuses. They got one in Annapolis and then one in Santa Fe, and they're a great books program. So they read in the undergraduate program and in their Western liberal arts grad program, they read the quote unquote 100 great books of the Western canon, unquote. And if you're a longtime follower of me, you can probably imagine the face that I'm making about that concept.
Western. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing that attracted me to this school was that they read all primary sources, no secondary sources. And I hated reading secondary sources at the time, so I thought that sounded awesome. And then I got there, and then it was not awesome sometimes, because we could talk about Confucian rituals for months, And then one day in class, I was like, do you guys think maybe we should go like watch one, like meet a Confucian in the real world
Mm-hmm.
and maybe like see what some of these rituals look like? And
Mm-hmm.
everyone was like, no, 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 we can't do that. We had to have this pure interface with the text. We have to have no context and we have to have this pure experience that, and I'm like nodding along, but internally I'm thinking, I'm not sure language or humans work like that.
No.
No. But it was cool though, because I had one tutor there who kept sneaking me context on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, really helpful. Like, you know, he'd ask us what we were reading in such and such a class, and then like he'd let us know, oh yeah, low key, that author was lying. That historical event never happened, and this is
Mm-hmm.
why he was lying about it, and this is why it was important to him to lie about it. And I got a
Mm-hmm.
lot out of that. But I really liked the books that I was reading. I got really, really into Chinese classics, Indian classics, Japanese classics,
Mm-hmm.
and then I graduated and once again asked myself, what the hell am I going to do with this degree? And then I started getting deeper and deeper into gaming. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember it was a couple of years after that I had worked at a game store running after school programs for kids for a while, like running role playing games for little kids, which was very, very fun and formative experience for my eventual approach to
Mm-hmm.
design and to play. And I was working as an SAT tutor for a while, and that job was wild. Like there's these standardized tests that you can literally pay to get better at.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, every student I had, you know, I'm looking at them and thinking like the fact that you can afford for me to be here is evidence that you're going to be okay, I think,
Mm-hmm.
probably. And
Well,
so
also
then
that fact, and that
yeah,
fact that you were helping them sort of, shall we say, learn to the test, not to life.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And the more you try to, if you approach SAT tutoring and you're trying to learn for life, you will be worse at it. If you do the ACT science section and you try to do science on it, you will get a worse grade than the person who ignores all of the science and just focuses on the test part. And so, yeah, then uh, there's some interesting correlations to game design that I could get into
Mm-hmm.
later there. But so then I got my first jobs writing for role playing games in around 2014. Some people I met at conventions wanted me to write little bits for supplements to games, and for the first few years, I felt like I was usually a diversity hire.
Mm-hmm.
Like the gaming industry, as many of you listening have seen, has historically been the province of cisgender straight white men, often with like a little bit of financial security.
Mm-hmm.
It's you go there and it's supposed to be weirdos and nerds, and you look around and you're like, this kind of looks like the mythical norm. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's changing very, very rapidly as hopefully as this podcast and this situation advances. But yeah, for the first few years, I felt like I was getting hired to write about a lot of topics that, uh, you know, gamers from the mythical norm didn't feel comfortable writing themselves, even if they were interested in it. And that was, I know there are a lot of frustrating things about that situation, but I actually came to appreciate it because I felt like I was writing about things and I was doing things in gaming that felt really special and really particular to me. And that gave me an opportunity to show my perspective on how gaming relates to race and culture and religion
Mm-hmm.
and identity, all of my favorite topics. So I got my first full time game writing job on 7th C Second Edition with John Wick Presents in 2016. That lasted for a couple of years before the company went under. And then I started I started going full-time freelance, and people ask me all the time how I make it as a full-time freelancer, and I tell them I can't exactly recommend it. Even here in America, where you have all types of access and resources that you don't have elsewhere, cost of living is very high, and taxes, especially for freelancers, especially for small freelancers, are brutal. So it's coming around the 1st of April, and I'm literally crying over my taxes the first couple of years I'm trying to do this. So, and I remember at the time, thinking about employment and my future, and at some point in those years of confusion and uncertainty, I remember thinking to myself, I wish I could just tell people they were racist for a living. And it turns out you can do that. It turns out that that is an option. So I remember there was a moment, one of the first times that I was looking over a book, like the publisher sent it back and they said, just check over the book. Let us know if there's typos in your section or whatever. And I'm reading through the book, and I'm leafing through somebody else's section, and I notice there's a description of a black man in the Caribbean, and his skin is described as the color of, I forget what specific food word they used. It might have been coffee or chocolate, one of those foods. And I remember reading that and thinking, that feels weird. I feel like I see that a lot, and it's kind of awkward. And I looked some stuff up online, and sure enough, there was lots of people complaining about why do they always have to describe us as food? Why are we always like olives or almonds or chocolates or yeah. So I just left it
compared to mayo.
Exactly. Yeah. Like we're getting consumed over here, and yeah, the white person being compared to the color of mayonnaise or the color of uncooked chicken just happens never to happen. Yeah. And so yeah, so
onions.
Exactly. So I left a comment on that, and there was like a moment of personal revelation there, and I realized, wait a second, like, it feels good to write things, and yet somehow being able to be that little help to somebody else somehow feels way more impactful, even though I just changed one word on one line of this book. And I started thinking about all the conversations that I'd had around gaming, and all of the times that I'd seen someone's facial expression when they felt true relief or true understanding or true enlightenment when I'd help them through a moment or a concept, usually having to do with race, culture, or religion, that they themselves didn't understand until I talked them through it. And I thought back to that moment that I thought, I wish I could just tell people they were racist for a living. And I realized maybe this isn't just a joke. Maybe this could be a real thing. And maybe those opportunities, that's the chance that I have to make a real difference in somebody's life. Because like, I'm a good writer. I like my writing. I like my game design, but the good feeling that I get from helping someone else get their thing, their vision over the line, and seeing their eyes light up, seeing how proud they are of the thing that they made, and knowing that I was able just to push a little bit, just to nudge at them in the right direction and help them achieve that felt priceless to me. And so that was the beginning of my career as a cultural consultant. The job that we also sometimes call it a sensitivity reader. But I like the term cultural consultant better. I just think it sounds cooler. Yeah.
Well,
so
keeping it from turning into not just a stereotype or the trope.
Exactly.
The more destructive trope than as a quote unquote positive trope. versus a constructive trope, the destructive trope versus a constructive trope.
Exactly.
That happens in so many different things just because of where those biases, those perspectives, those contexts aren't in place, because fundamentally nothing exists in isolation.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's 80% of my job now. I started writing essays, and I started offering my services to many different projects, originally just in tabletop gaming, but then it expanded to books and video games, even a couple of corporate contexts. Like I've done corporate workshops, and not quite not exactly like a DEI seminar, but like kind of the next thing up after that. No shade to DEI seminars. I think that they are a necessary thing, even though everyone has complaints about DEI seminars, people in them, the people taking them, everything. But
people creating them.
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, so cultural consulting and or sensitivity reading in all of these different contexts. That's about 80% of my job now. And then the other 20% is writing and design. And that other 20% ends up taking way more time somehow. Because that's how writing and design projects are.
Right. Well, because it's literally R&D and then trying to put it into a it's also technical writing, trying to put it into that form, which is
exactly
one of the things I've sort of been learning as I've been trying to get my 2 scenarios finished and written, so that I can get them further into the publishing standpoint of it all, is just that standpoint of, oh, there's things I do without even thinking about it. How do I convey that? How do I phrase this and tell? In some cases, people want you to tell them exactly what to do in this spot. And it's like, no, this is where you got to call for what's going on at your table for this to happen. What's the feel in that social situation? And especially where's the safety tools then also being applied, especially in what I've been writing right now has been horror games.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and horror games are so challenging from a safety perspective. Also, like, I think some of the most interesting places to put like safety design into play. Something I love to brag about in gaming, like my favorite thing to brag about in gaming, is that I was there when the first ever X card was created.
Oh,
yeah.
Do tell.
So I'm at my friend John Stavropoulos' place, and it's our usual Wednesday night game in Queens, and it must have been around 2012. And we had a guy in our gaming group, Dave Berg, who's also a game designer. And Dave had this habit of, we'd play all these different games, and we'd play usually different games every week or 2 weeks, and we'd go through a whole game. And Dave is really, really particular about what he does and doesn't like in fiction. And we get through a game, and at the end, we'd be talking about it, and we'd be like, Dave, what do you think? How'd you like the game? And Dave would say, actually, this one thing that happened at the beginning of the game that we kept doing, I thought it was really annoying, and it really made the game not fun for me. And he'd talk about it at length, and we'd be like, damn, Dave, you went through this whole 3-hour session and you were upset about that the whole time. Why didn't you say something? And he's like, well, I don't know. It just felt awkward, and I don't really know. So one day, John had designed this game with this stack of index cards with random things written on them as a sort of an oracle mechanism to figure out what was going to happen next in the game. And he lays them all out, and he's like, all right, so we're going to play this game with these index cards I made. And he had one just with an X drawn on it. And he said, so Dave, I made you this card. So if something happens that you don't like in the game because you don't think it's it's not the right genre, it's not, you're not into it, just tap or lift the card, and then we won't do that. And I remember those first couple of sessions, like, we never actually used the card, but I think all of us were much more open and verbal about what we did and didn't want in the game than we had been before the card was made. And at first, it didn't have anything to do with like out of character safety. it was just a tool so that we could express which direction we wanted the game to go in creatively or narratively. But then at the same time, there were also a lot of conversations happening around safety in games, and people, especially with like strangers or convention scenarios, ending up in games that they really didn't like, or where they felt personally unsafe or threatened or triggered or anything like that. And so John went back to this concept of the X card and generalized it, and now it's better known as a safety tool than it is as a method of like narrative editing. But originally it was both, and yeah.
Well, but in another way, when we take it away from the games, just purely the game sense, to what you're saying about the narrative editing, this is also something that happens in therapy, more especially when we're talking about the principle of narrative therapy, which is about editing the story that we're telling ourselves, especially when it's been a traumatic event, to start shifting it from something that has deconstructed and disempowered us into something that has empowered us.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot, because when I'm really upset about something, I feel like there are a lot of therapeutic techniques like meditation, or a lot of cognitive behavioral techniques that I've tried. But when I'm really upset about something, sometimes they make it worse. But one of the most reliable balms for me in those situations is hearing a song or reading a book, seeing the thing that I'm feeling reflected in art. And that gives me a sense of it. It means the bad feeling doesn't go away, but it gives me a sense of connection to the experience of other people that is soothing in a way that I can't really find anywhere else.
Right. Well, you're in essentially community. You're not sitting in isolation around the idea that this is only happening to me, which is one of the both beauties of art, and is being able to have the connection, but it's also one of the most important things about community.
Yeah.
And how we are imparting and encouraging things such as sympathy and empathy.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I know, at least that I've learned in therapy and working with people, is there's at least three, shall we say, positive things that can happen. A person can feel empathy, or they can feel sympathy, which is, some might say, downgrade, or is like something similar. It's not like you're empathically connecting with the sadness, the anger, the frustration, whatever the emotion is, but you're feeling that this situation is not right. And then there is compassion and kindness that also needs to be appropriate to the situation, as opposed to massively generalized and is not appropriate at all.
Yeah.
Those are at least the three potential positive or constructive ways people can respond to it, versus the complete lack of it, or just even numb. And a lot of people also go into things expecting empathy when they might be able to at least get sympathy. They might be able to at least get compassion and kindness, but then they're upset they never got the empathy. It's like, you got at least something.
Yeah.
And while it may not feel great, but there is something that is connecting to you. And then on another tangent, different line here is, and I know for myself, gaming like this is a social activity for me.
And that's my favorite thing about tabletop role-playing games is the built-in community, is the fact that whatever I'm creating, I'm never creating alone. That feels really good, for the same reasons that I chase that feeling of collaboration, chase that feeling of helping someone else's dream get across the line, even more than my own. That's why I love role-playing games so much, and why I love the community around them. And that community exists in lots of other media, but it's integral to the way that we create stories in a tabletop role-playing game. And I love that.
Yeah. Well, any other thoughts you have on that? Because I think it's about time for us to take a break.
Oh, let's take a break. Any thoughts I have will be better after.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and take a break here, folks. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, with James Mendez Hodges, game designer and cultural consultant. So we'll be back shortly, folks. Stay tuned.
Voice America is on LinkedIn. Connect with us today.
Discover the power of music to heal and uplift. Introducing NeuroVibe, where rhythm meets recovery. NeuroVibe fuses ambient music textures with rhythmic layers to create music that goes beyond relaxation. It's crafted to resonate deeply, perfect for relaxation, self-reflection, or therapeutic sessions. NeuroVibe invites you to connect with your inner self through immersive sound. Explore NeuroVibe today on SoundCloud and experience the transformative power of music. Tune in, find your vibe, and discover what NeuroVibe can do for you. For more information, check out NeuroVibe on SoundCloud today at soundcloud.com/NeuroVibe Brainspotting. NeuroVibe is intended for general wellness and relaxation purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Explore NeuroVibe now on SoundCloud. Dive in, find your rhythm, and feel better with NeuroVibe.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Change your world. Change your life. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with James Mendez Hodes, writer, cultural consultant, martial arts expert, or at least savant. I would put it that way.
I practice martial arts. The better you get at martial arts, the more hesitant you are to describe yourself as an expert. So does that make it more egotistical if I say, based on that, does it make it more egotistical if I say I am or I'm not?
Well, I put it in a different way. and I actually do prefer not using the word expert for myself. Specialist is what I tend to use, because there are those who, as soon as you say expert, their goal is to depose you.
That's true. That is really important.
And just as long as it's like they've got to find whatever that hole in the knowledge is that you have, and they need to exploit it and show it off to everybody around them, which gets not just into arrogance, it gets into ego.
Yeah.
And if anything, not so much your ego, but that's entirely possible for those who hold on to the idea of experts and have made it part of their identity, but also for those who need to poke holes in people's identity with those holes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's one topic within martial arts on which I will say I am an expert, and that is getting people from wildly divergent styles and with wildly divergent experience levels and familiarities to practice together. Mm-hmm. And this is my favorite part about martial arts, and it often happens at nerd conventions. We get a bunch of people together, and we've got like Brazilian jiu-jitsu people, we got historical European martial arts people, armed combat, unarmed combat, capoeira, boxing, all kinds of different things. And I've been organizing these little practices where people from many different styles get together and we calibrate everything to the experience level of whoever's feeling the least confident about what's going on. And we come up with something that everyone can do, and everyone gets to learn from everybody else's style. And so, yeah, that's my one type of expertise that I will happily claim, is bringing people from different styles together.
Well, and that's also one of the things that as I think about it, I think Avatar: The Last Airbender is a perfect example of seeing the very different styles of bending or martial arts then in relationship to each other as they're moving.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that it's, it's the greatest martial arts show, or, at least tied for the greatest martial arts show ever made. We actually get to see how culture informs martial arts. And yeah, that concept's going to come back in some other topics we discussed today also.
Well, yeah, especially even when like in Legend of Korra, there's a point where it's watching everyone who's fighting these new airbenders, and it's like everyone's struggling. It's like, yeah, because you never actually had to learn how to fight an airbender and that style of movement versus fire, water, and earth, which were the predominant ones in the series. Exactly. I actually remember when I was, I also did martial arts myself, and I was sparring with a friend of mine, and he at one point stopped because he said, "You keep switching styles. Whenever you don't see something, whenever you don't seem to get the response you want, you switch to this other one, from going from a full body attack to going to a joint attack."
Yeah. And that's great strategy. But at the same time, there's sometimes when I'm practicing, when I'm training, when I have to force myself not to do that. Having had experience with many different styles, and being exposed to like a new situation where I'm like, oh, this other style I practiced has the perfect answer to exactly this situation. Sometimes I have to force myself to hold back, because if I don't stretch one style to learn to deal with that situation, I might not learn if I'm just falling back on the things that I know work. So making myself leave my comfort zone, or like stretching one comfort zone to cover an eventuality that I feel like a different one of my comfort zones already has locked down. That's a really important part of training and sparring, especially.
It is, and it's also the flip side, where those other zones, which I also find, especially with neurodiversity as well as intersectionality, also provides a lot of strength to survive.
Yes.
And if not survive, thrive, where another area actually does have a skill or a concept that will allow this to move through by pivoting over to it.
Yeah.
And so, but I think the real key is recognizing, when do you need to stick with a thing to start recognizing and stretching it, versus switching over to the other one to still keep things moving forward. So it's really learning that aspect of, how do you learn where do you need to be solid? Where do you need to be flexible? How do you move between the two depending on the situation? Because no one situation is purely just one response.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that also comes back to what we're looking at with tabletop role-playing, and especially the awareness of what stories are being written.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So before we started talking, you mentioned that you ask, going into the second half, you ask all of your guests,
I try to.
What's a myth about mental health that they wish people understood a little better. So intersecting with this thing that we just been talking about, I don't know if anybody else listening to us has heard, or rather seen, this proliferation of memes and content on the internet talking about mental health and talking about neurodiversity. And a lot of those are really cool and are an awesome way to learn about a lot of other people. But there's one particular trend that whenever I see it, I feel like I got a different perspective on it. And So I'm neurodivergent. I have all types of different mental illnesses and neurodivergences, but a lot of the time, I'm scrolling my feed because I have bad habits, and I see a generalization about what neurotypical people are like. And so there's some memes saying like neurotypical people do this, neurotypical people do this, and I read the description, and I think to myself, I is that I think that's white people. I think you just discovered white people. And so I'm reading this description of like neurotypical people are like this, and I'm like, are you sure? Because I mean, I definitely know a lot of neurotypical people who are like that. I know the cultures you're talking about, at least like living here where I do in the northeastern United States. But like, are you sure they're like that in Italy? Are you sure they're like that in China? Are you sure they're like that in the Philippines? And it's not that it's not that the meme is necessarily wrong, but it is describing a specific group, and it's describing it as a neurotype. Not that neurotype is unrelated, but there's also an element of acculturation that ends up feeding into that characterization. And that's something that I think about a lot of the time when I think about what it means to be like my type of neurodivergent, other people's type of neurodivergent. The way in which culture intersects with those characterizations and those habits is really, really interesting to me as someone who, because of my job, I pay a huge amount of attention to cultural trends and how culture affects behavior. And sometimes that's my first lens on understanding how somebody acts. And then someone else who maybe knows more about psychology or neurotypes points out a way in which it interacts with like a neurotype that this person has, or they think they might have, something like that. And I feel like I don't get to fully understand it until I look at both of those things together.
Right. So I don't know if you've read Gabor Mate's Myth of Normal.
I haven't. Tell me about that.
I would recommend reading that one. Gabor Mate is a medical doctor who worked with addicted populations of the First Nations up in Canada. And he is a survivor of growing up in Budapest and the communist Iron Curtain regime at that time, as well as some certain degrees of ethnic trauma from that parts of the world. But looking at really the myths and ideas of what is considered normal, which is in the Western European consumerist capital principle.
Yeah.
And is it really is it really as effective, and is it as really true when we've actually got a very narrow margin of people that fit that, and there's a lot more people on the other side sides of, shall we say, the bell curve that don't fit it. To say that this is the typical place, not. So I would recommend reading that one. It is a lengthy book, but I think that also goes back to what you were saying too about the mythic normal, even what we see in gaming. Of here is a set who, because of economics, because of the time period and so forth, we're able to set a kind of standard for a certain period in time, and we're moving beyond that with the variety of us that are interested in this genre and who want to engage in this genre and who are producing stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And it's good to see that change, and it's good to see the new cultures evolving, even within some of the same demographics that were dominant or most common in gaming when I was coming up. Even just seeing that like new generations are interacting with gaming in new ways, the ways in which like gamers who learn about gaming from streaming or who come into gaming from video games that were originally based on role-playing games, how they have different perspectives on it. Like it's frustrating sometimes if you come from a different gaming culture and you have a bunch of different assumptions, but it's also it's also, I think, fundamentally good to see culture clash happen. Because that's when we learn. That's when we, like we were saying about different styles meeting each other. That's when your comfort zone gets stressed and then expanded.
Right. And that is also when we can glaringly see where, like you said, I can get paid telling people that they're racist. And
Yeah.
in that standpoint, because again, it's a question too of what stories are being normalized, which fit a certain part of the bell curve.
Exactly.
Versus
Yeah.
done. But I was just talking to a friend of mine who's very much into animation, and he was talking about I think it was called Robot Dreams, and the animation story that he was telling about, and he said he thought I would appreciate it, is the standpoint of the classic story is two people meet, something causes them not to be able to stay together, and then they just spend the rest of their lives lamenting about the other person until something magically happens that brings them back together and they live happily ever after. Versus what show happened in this particular animation was they met, things didn't work out, and they moved on being happy people. Versus they had to come back to this tortured love story, which how often do we see that? Not just in media and so forth, but does get to be a premise of so many of the games that we play too.
Yeah. It's there's this idea that things failing or things ending necessarily has to be bad. And with games, sometimes that means that games will go on past the point where they really should have ended, or people will try to make things work when they really should have just like gone separate ways or tried something different or gotten together with a different gaming group. There's been since the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide came out, which I worked on pretty extensively as a cultural consultant. There's been a lot of backlash to the existence of people talking about safety tools or having session zeros talking about like what they do and don't like in games or like what triggers them. And so there's all these outrage videos all over YouTube and like all of this outrage all over social media talking about like, I don't want that in my game. I don't want an X card in my game. How dare you put this stuff in? Like, my players aren't snowflakes. I don't want a game like that. And I'm looking at that and thinking like, okay, so you're saying you're using this tool of social media to tell me what kind of game you don't want. And I've been doing that with a card with an X drawn on it, and that seems like less work to me, but it kind of seems like you're doing something really similar to the thing that you're complaining about.
But not actually finding a way to construct the game you do want with those that you want to be able to play it with.
Yeah. Or maybe they are. Maybe if I hate the X card and I make an outrage video about the X card, maybe there's going to be a bunch of people in the YouTube comments section who are going to become my friends and game with me for a really long time. I don't know. Maybe that's working for someone. Maybe there are people finding community in mutual hatred. And I mean,
yeah,
good
sadly.
for them.
Yeah, sadly, that the thing that hatred is the thing that brings and creates the bonding.
Yeah, it's sad in a lot of different ways, but if these tools, if everybody knowing about these tools means that the people who hate them are going to go off and play a game together, and then the people who like them are going to go off and play a game together with each other, then, it's like in that show Your Friends Like. We've gone our separate ways, and we're each happy doing our own thing. So I think they worked. I feel like the safety tools worked. Right.
Well, and actually, I was just recently, and it's probably not, by the time this comes out, it probably should be. I was recently on the Miskatonic MUP, Miskatonic University podcast. We were talking about safety tools and safety mechanics, especially from a psychological side of it.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things is I had to point out is what we're seeing is what is or isn't working for their nervous system based off the trauma they've experienced.
Yeah.
Sadly, yes, it does create these places where hate is being festered. It's also tied into ego as well, which comes back to what we were saying about the idea of specialist versus expert.
Yeah. And I can't knock the topic too much, because sometimes you're watching television and you're watching a show or a reality show, especially, where you just see like the worst personalities clashing against each other. And a lot of comedies are like this. And you sit back and you talk to the people who you're watching the show with about like, wow, these people have really bad habits, and they're approaching their own mentalities and their own clashes in these really unproductive ways. And you end up having this really great conversation on the other side of the screen about how terrible the people are on the screen. So maybe that's similar. Maybe I need to have empathy for the haters.
I'm not going to say not having empathy for the haters, but it's about recognizing whether this is clashing against safety. And the other big thing I know he said during that one is safety is subjective.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that can be universally applied everywhere with a 100% certainty. No, it's subjective depending on what experiences that you've had. So even going back to what you're saying about bringing these different martial arts fighters together, they're all working off of different principles of how do you fight, flexibility versus solidity, the aspect of groundwork versus kicks and throws and so forth. All of these things they've been able to condition around a situation and a style that fits and works for them, but it's not going to fit and work for everybody.
Yeah, and that's coming from people's personal backgrounds, and it's coming from context, and which is I hope we all know this from about the safe space conversation. I feel like this is something that we should know, but safe spaces aren't universal. There is no such thing as a space that is safe for everybody. Safe spaces come from context, and as soon as I'm bringing people from different martial styles together, immediately that becomes apparent. What feels safe to one person, what kind of contact, what kind of speed and weight of a hit it feels safe for one person versus feels safe for another person can be radically, wildly different.
Which even comes back to what you do when you're doing your cultural consulting on the pieces of paper. What stories feel comfortable, which ones don't.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a different. Yeah.
No, you finish.
Oh yeah. I was just thinking about different games that I've worked on have safety calibrated in really different ways. Like one of the games that I've most enjoyed working on recently was Eat the Reich by Grant Howitt and Rowan Rook and Descartes. And this is a game about some vampires airdropping into Europe in 1943 with a mission to drink all of Hitler's blood. So it is this ultraviolet, over-the-top game of overindulgent anti-fascist violence. And so when this game was first announced and then when it came out that I was cultural consultant on it, people were really confused sometimes because a lot of people were thinking, well, cultural consulting, it's about making things safe for everybody, right? Like there's there's Nazis in this game and there's over the top violence, and it just a lot of people seemed kind of confused that I would want to work on a game like that. I love this game and I personally love this concept, but there's a bit in the beginning that we wrote that says look, we have pretty strong feelings about disliking fascists, and we think that if there's fascists around you, you should maybe choose violence towards them before they choose violence towards you, that might be something you might want to consider. But like, if playing a game like this sounds like it feels fun and cathartic, then yeah, you should do it. And we're going to make sure that it's fun and cathartic in ways that don't also feel like too racist or too sexist for you to enjoy. But like, if you're not going to be able to have fun, like in a game that's like about Nazis, that's taking these serious topics in a way that doesn't feel serious to you, you probably shouldn't play the game. And that's fine. Like, there's other games you're going to be able to enjoy, but cultural consulting on a game with that base premise ends up creating a very, very different understanding of a very different kind of safety than cultural consulting on a game that is like much wider ranging or has a different age range. Like if I'm cultural consulting on like the My Little Pony RPG or something like that.
Right. And I think that nuance is a thing that is definitely hard for some people to recognize.
Yeah, for sure.
I think one of the biggest reasons why it's so hard to recognize is because it gets caught up in ego.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think it's okay to be egotistical. I think it's okay to have a high opinion of yourself. But if your ego prevents you from seeing other people's perspectives, other cultures or other neurotypes, imagining how they might see something, first of all, that sounds like a boring life, and I'm sad for you. And yeah, second of all, I think a lot of the really interesting kind of work we can do in game design, accounting for different perspectives, tailoring things to specific perspectives, all the stuff that's like part and parcel for my job as cultural consultant. I think it makes games better if we can do that, like just as games, not just as things that will affirm identities or not hurt people.
Which is ultimately what is our biggest goal, is to be able to have the games we enjoy that don't cause harm to others, which also is why supporting safety tools is an important thing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And even if you don't like safety tools, like, if you walk up to a game, there's an X card on a table and you don't like that because you're into something else, then great. You just got a signal. You just got a content warning, and now you can avoid that game, and you're not going to have a bad time. The people at the table aren't going to have a bad time because you were there. I think we all win.
And it very much, and I'll say I'm going to say from my side of things, and this I know is not the professional opinion of my colleagues, it's also a sign of just how much work you still have to do on yourself to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope they get that. I hope it works for them. I hope they find something.
And that's one of the best things we can hope and do and go focus on. We hope you find the healing. Just it's not going to happen here. It may not happen with us.
Yeah. And we've come so far in the past. It's been like 12 years or so since the first X card, and there's whole discussions online about like different kinds of safety tools. Lots of people don't like the X card because of like certain interpretations of it that they're familiar with, that or they want other things that are more detailed or more nuanced. I'm still kind of an X card loyalist in a lot of ways because of that first experience that I had. But both John Stavropoulos and I have changed some of the ways that we describe the X card, that we introduce the X card in games, because of some of the ways it's been like interpreted or even misinterpreted over the years. And my own take on the X card is influenced by lots of other safety tools that I've seen over the years. A lot of like the safety materials that I've seen in, for example, the LARP community, those kinds of like signals that people use to indicate safety or interest or that kind of thing. And yeah, there's lots of safety tools out there that I do or don't like for various different reasons, but tailoring safety tools to different games, designing safety tools that are specific to what your game needs, especially in a horror context,
Mhm.
is both really interesting and like it's a really fun kind of design. And that's another thing that that makes me sad about people who just reject it out of hand. Like, this is a fascinating, like really interesting, satisfying area of design that we could get into, and
Mhm.
uh you're just leaving fun on the table not to be had.
Yep. Well, let's see how many roller coasters you're going to go on to when they don't actually have safety harnesses. I think you're only going to be able to
Yeah.
get through one before you have to get out of full body traction.
I'm sure they'll have a really good time on that one roller coaster.
Yep, for those few seconds before that loop throws them out of off the roller coaster and
Yeah.
full body traction.
Mm.
And learning to walk again, learning how to feed themselves, let alone having to any of the other things that happen to people who have had accidents that have taken away their mobility to that extent.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why you have a safety harness on your roller coaster.
Yeah. So something that I think about a lot is everyone's got a story of their worst gaming experience. Mm-hmm. And everyone's got that story. Sometimes it's a safety thing. Sometimes it's an out of character identity thing. Sometimes it's a design thing. Sometimes it's about the specific choices people made in the game. But I think that even if I were to ask someone who can't stand safety tools, like, hey, what's your worst gaming story? Is there some terrible experience you had that you tell like it's an Aristocrats joke to people when you're, sitting around talking about gaming? And they'll tell some story, right? And the bad thing that happened is almost always like it's preventable. It could have been prevented if we had some means to communicate, some way to like talk about the possibility of a problem ahead of time that we could have averted. Mm-hmm. And I think of that design space as safety design.
Mm-hmm. And as I also said during the MEP episode, it is another tool, just like the game manual you're using to be able to run this game to ensure that you have a game.
Yeah. But yeah, like that's we need to have those kinds of safety tools in martial arts. And it's different for different styles. Like, and this is something that comes out really clearly when we're doing this kind of cross style sparring. Like, a lot of styles are used to going full speed and full force with pads, and they calibrate their movements very, very differently based on the presence of pads to soften the impact and to make sure that their hands don't get hurt when they punch. Other styles will soften an impact by pulling punches for range. They'll aim like a little short of somebody's face, but they'll throw a punch that's otherwise full speed and full force. Other styles will just go really, really slowly. This is the approach that my own training does most often. We go really slow. We hit people and we hit at full extension, but we go slowly enough that the impact does not cause damage. And with the assumption that when you're in a real life situation, adrenaline is going to speed you up naturally. But each of these different approaches has its own drawbacks. Like my style, assuming that you're going to speed up eventually, assuming that you're going to speed up in a real situation, but never training for speed, means that you are going to be slower than someone who does train for speed. Going full speed and full force with pads means that if you're in a situation without pads or you're sparring someone without, then you might mess them up or you might hurt yourself really badly. And pulling punches, if you always train to hit just a millimeter from someone's face, then you might have a poor understanding of range. So when things get serious, you'll find yourself punching short. And and missing punches or misjudging ranges that in a real situation you need to understand better. So yeah, different things, different styles consider different things to be safe, and bringing together different perspectives on safety creates this whole new safety design process that like I find really fascinating. And yeah, if I'm an expert on anything in martial arts, I hope it's that.
Safety.
Yeah.
One of our most supreme things that allow us to enjoy martial arts, our anime, our TTRPs.
Yes, exactly.
James, I want to thank you for coming on and having this discussion. Where can folks find you if they want to learn more, and also have you on their shows out there, or just learn more about this topic?
Oh yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. I love doing these interviews, and on the internet, you can find me at jamesmendezhodes.com. I got blog articles and essays and all types of stuff, a couple of games on there too. It has links to some of my games that you can get, like Avatar Legends from Magpie Games, Thousand Arrows from Galileo Games. You probably know where to find Dungeons and Dragons. I worked on that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all linked on. Yeah. Well, it's all linked from my website, jamesmendezhodes.com. And then if you want to talk to me on social media, I'm mostly on Bluesky these days. I am Lula Vampiro on Bluesky. I'm trying to get off of Twitter, but Bluesky is good. I'm trying to post more on Tumblr, although the tags are very intimidating. And I'm Lula Vampiro there, and we'll have links in the show notes, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. I'll put as many of those as I can find in there as well. So thanks again for being on the show, and look forward to having more things for you guys to listen to as we move into 2025 and hitting those 100 episodes of this podcast as well. So stay tuned. We'll be back in the future, folks. Be well, and have a good New Year's.
For sure.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.